What is up, my friends? Welcome back to the Daily Dose. We're coming at you with day number 344. We're almost done. We are approaching the final week very soon of the Daily Dose, but we're not there yet. Right now, we're in the book of First Peter. So the other day, we did First Peter 1 and 2. Today, we're looking at First Peter 3 through 5, and we also have Psalm number 34 slid in as our side item for the day. Let's see what we're working with today. So if you'll remember where we left off in First Peter last time, Peter was talking about some instruction for Christian living, and he was talking about submitting. He was talking about slaves and slaves submitting to their masters. That whole section is continued, picking up with submission in regards to wives and their husbands, right? So here we see Peter say, well, here, I'll just read it. This is in verse 3 from chapter 3. Your beauty, again speaking to women, or to wives more specifically, your beauty should not come from outward adornment, such as elaborate hairstyles and the wearing of gold jewelry or fine cloth. Okay, now, is Peter saying that, ladies, you shouldn't fix yourselves up? You shouldn't put on makeup? You shouldn't fix your hair? You shouldn't try to look nice? Is that what Peter is saying? I don't think so. Now, if you're a woman and you don't wear makeup, hey, that's all good too. You don't have to, right? A lot of ladies choose not to do that. And that's totally on you. But we'll see as we go further into this verse that I don't think that so much that Peter is saying, look, don't try to make yourself look good outwardly at all. Like, just let yourself go. Who cares what you look like? I don't think that's what Peter is saying. I think what Peter is saying is, and we'll go on to verse 4, and you'll see where I'm going with this. He says, rather, it should be that of your inner self, the unfading beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit. So here Peter's saying, look, your real beauty, it doesn't come from your hairstyle and from your manicure and your pedicure, right? It doesn't come from your makeup and your jewelry. That's not where your beauty comes from. It should come from, Peter says, a gentle and quiet spirit. Okay? So you see what I'm saying? It doesn't appear that Peter is condemning trying to make yourself look presentable and look nice, right? Whether you're a man or a woman. But it seems here that Peter's just emphasizing that your outer beauty is of no value at all. If you have no inner beauty, then your outward beauty is irrelevant, right? That's what I'm getting here. But notice how he describes what makes inner beauty in a wife. A gentle and quiet spirit. And that's controversial in the present age of feminism that we live in, y'all. A woman having a gentle and quiet spirit, right? Now, I haven't looked up what those words mean, right, in the original text, in the Greek language. And I've mentioned this before recently. I'm just going by the way the words present themselves and the little knowledge that I've got about the context and about, what's going on. So we're really just taking kind of a cursory look at this, just at face value, as the NIV reads. But it's saying that the unfading beauty of a woman should be her gentle and quiet spirit, which is of great worth in God's sight. For this is the way the holy women of the past who put their hope in God used to adorn themselves. Okay, so notice, he was saying a gentle and quiet spirit. Well, what does that mean? What is a gentle and quiet spirit? Well, we know what the word gentle means, right? We know what the word quiet means, but I think that Peter elaborates a little more for us coming up. He's saying that it comes from a gentle and quiet spirit. And then it goes on to say, for this is the way that the holy women of the past used to adorn themselves. They submitted themselves to their own husbands, like Sarah, who obeyed Abraham and called him her Lord. So here it appears that this whole concept of a gentle and quiet spirit is something that will produce submission of a wife to her husband. It almost seems like they're synonymous. They're two different sides of the same coin. A gentle and quiet spirit, he's comparing that directly to Sarah's obedience of Abraham, right? So, agree with me or not, I believe that wives are supposed to submit to their husbands. And you can argue about what that word submit means and how well men are supposed to submit to. But look, it says it right here. It says they submitted themselves to their own husbands, like Sarah who obeyed Abraham. Okay, so Peter is equating submission with obedience. Okay? Peter is equating submission with obedience. But then, guys, Peter doesn't leave y'all out either, right? Pretty much most of the places in the Bible where it talks about wives submitting to their husbands, there's usually a follow-up for the guys, right? Husbands, in the same way, be considerate as you live with your wives, right? Now, what does that mean, in the same way? Does that mean that you should be doing all the exact same things I told women to do, like submit to your wife? I don't think that's what he's saying here. He's just saying in the same way, right? Well, what was the way in which the wives were to do it? They were to make themselves beautiful based on their inner beauty, based on their heart, not so much on the outside. So I think that's what Peter's getting at. He's saying, husbands, in the same way, right? It's not about your hair, how you comb it. It's not about putting gel, it's not about your cologne, right? It's about your heart. It's about being considerate as you live with your wives and treat them with respect as the weaker partner or vessel, right? And as heirs with you of the gracious gift of life, so that nothing will hinder your prayers. Notice that there's an insinuation from Peter that your prayers might be hindered if you are not considerate to your wife and if you don't treat your wife with respect. Your prayers may be hindered. It's an interesting point. Well, there's so much more that we could cover here, but I'm just going to hit up a couple of quick points. We're going to skip down to the next section, which Peter talks about suffering for doing good, right? And one verse in here that specifically speaks to me. He says, but in your hearts revere Christ as Lord. Okay? That word revere, it's where we get the word reverential, like reverential fear and awe, right? So revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. Friends, are you prepared to give a reason to anybody that asks? If you're not, we should be, right? Because Peter says that we need to be, right? And what does that mean? Does that just mean sharing your testimony? Oh, it could, but I think that there's definitely a possibility of more to it than that, right? Apologetics, you know, familiar with that word? It's a fancy way to talk about defending the faith, right? Presenting persuasive arguments and proofs towards Christ, towards Christianity, towards the things that we believe, right? And there's tons of information out there that you can find on very persuasive proofs, very logical proofs, where you can essentially prove so many things about the Bible that are debated, right? Using the rules of logic and philosophy. And it's actually very interesting and it's very fun. I enjoy listening to audiobooks about that. I enjoy reading up on that. So I would venture to say here, always be prepared to give everyone who asks you the reason for the hope that you have. Yeah, I think that includes sharing what God's done in your life, but I think it also can and should include a logical and philosophical argument, persuasion, to spur people along, right? Because you can say, hey, I believe this because this happened to me. Well, that's subjective, right? That's subjective. Any wacko could say something crazy and you know, what does that mean? But if you lay out a discussion, an argument, persuasively, and you use the rules of thought and the rules of logic, you can bring someone to a place where they can't argue with you, where they either have to admit that they're not thinking logically or that you're right. Okay? And that doesn't necessarily bring someone to Christ. I get that. But anyways, that's all I'm going to say on that. Next, there's a section that talks about the living God, right? It talks about how Christ suffered and how there's a living God, and it talks about the potential, you know, judgment that's going to be coming and how the end is near. And one thing here, it says, as a result, they do not live the rest of their lives for evil human desires. And here he's talking about the people that are in the body of Christ, right? People who are Christians. As a result, they do not live the rest of their earthly lives for human desires, but rather for the will of God. Okay? For you have spent enough time in the past doing what pagans choose to do, living in debauchery, lust, drunkenness, orgies, carousing, and detestable idolatry. And then notice this. They are surprised. They, meaning people who are not Christians. They are surprised that you do not join in or join them in their recklessness, wild living, and they heap abuse on you. Friends, are people surprised about the choices and decisions you make in regards to morality? and what you do for your fun and your entertainment, are people surprised? Do they say stuff to you? If not, then I suspect that you're probably hanging around with only Christians and not very many secular people. If you are hanging around with secular people, I would guess that maybe you're not following your convictions maybe as much as you should. And again, I'm not judging anybody. I'm just trying to kind of equate this to what Peter is saying, right? Peter is saying, as Christians, you're going to slow your roll when it comes to sin. And when non-believers see you and they notice you, that they might be joking around in very inappropriate ways and you don't join in because you're like, oh, that's not really appropriate. They're probably going to pick on you, right? A classic example of this is so many times and this is mainly in work situations, not so much at my current job, but in the past, be hanging around with some guys from work on the job, right, working, and then somebody will bring up the topic of the opposite sex. And there will be some very crude things that are said from time to time. There will be a discussion about having illicit sexual relations, all that kind of stuff. And I generally keep out of that, right? I don't even get involved in the conversation one way or the other. I just stay out of it. And if I stay out of it for long enough, people start saying something like, well, what's up with you, dude? And then they start questioning me like, well, so, and anyways, I don't want to get into too much detail, but my point being is that people that are not Christians notice when you're a Christian, right? Because generally and not always, but generally you're not going to partake in the same things and value the same things that non-believers do so often, okay? It says they are surprised that you do not join in with their recklessness, and they heap abuse on you. They might pick on you. They might talk smack about you. They might reject you. They might ostracize you, right? That might happen. But they will have to give an account to him who is ready to judge the living and the dead. Those are sobering words, friends. Sobering words. They will have to give an account to him who is ready to judge the living and the dead. And then the next section is about suffering for being a Christian. Most of us in the United States have no clue what suffering for being a Christian is all about. I'm not going to get into this too much, but just use Google. Do a little bit of searching about suffering and persecution in other parts of the world. And then Peter closes with a section specifically addressed more to the elders and to the flock, right? So he's got some good stuff to say here. That's all we've really got time for, though. So I'm going to cut it right there. But hey, thanks for being here. Thanks for your time. Thanks for your patience. And until we meet again, deuces.